Welcome in to the Devy Devotional Podcast, a show devoted to all things Devy and C2C. Hosted by John Arrington and Aaron Wilcox. This dynamic duo brings you actionable strategies with player-driven analysis for your Devy and C2C leagues. Let's dive in.
Let's dive into buys and sells. Welcome into the Devy Devotional, where we stay devoted to Devy. I'm your host, Dynasty Coach A. Normally it says it below me, but we had some technical difficulties. So tonight, just imagine you can see Dynasty Coach A there at the bottom, joined as always by Aaron Wilcox at Aaron Wilcox 86. As you can see at the bottom, of course. And then tonight we actually have a special guest. We brought on Josh Chevalier from Fantasy Points at CFF Guys on Twitter, and we're very excited to have him on. I talked to him a couple weeks ago, and of course we became the best of friends, and now all we want to do is talk about football, Devy, college, all that kind of good stuff. So we had to bring him on, pick his brain and see exactly what he thinks, who we should be buying, who should we be selling in Devy, in C2C, all that kind of good stuff. How's it going, guys? How's it going, Aaron?
Oh, it's going well, and really excited for tonight. This is going to be a great pod. I have no doubt about that.
Absolutely. Josh, thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you tell everyone really quickly about yourself a little bit, and then we can dive into the good stuff.
Yeah, I don't want to bore people too much, but I work for Fantasy Points, do some college football stuff over there, and man, I had a ton of fun chopping it up with you a couple weeks ago. It felt like there's some fun talk there. Quickly saw how smart you are, and so I'm just excited to be on the show and talk with you and Aaron and talk some ball, man. I mean, how much fun is it? We just get to take a Tuesday night and just talk about college football and future prospects. It's gonna be fun.
Absolutely. Love to hear it. You talking about how smart I was. You must have been talking about Aaron or something. Who knows? But I just do whatever Beth tells me to do, and that is all I need most of the time. But
smart man.
Tonight we are going to be talking about some buys and sells. Aaron was nice enough to create a list, and actually Josh added a few names to it as well. We're going to talk about, and when I say we, I mean Aaron and Josh are going to talk about some freshman recruits that I have not dove into just yet. So there'll be some fun, but maybe I can at least act like I know what I'm talking about at some point. But Aaron, you created the list. You want to bring up the first guy and see if he's a buy or sell?
Absolutely. And we can start just with the quarterbacks right away, I suppose. But Shedeur Sanders, Colorado quarterback. And I guess the reason that I brought him up is just because he went really high in a recent mock amongst some Devy industry guys. And I was really interested to see him going in the early first. I just have not seen him that high in the Devy C2C landscape. And I just want to know your guys' opinion on that. I mean, at that price, for me, he's a sell. But what do you guys think?
Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, Shedeur's a tough one to grade for me at this point. I mean, we have Jackson State tape, and then we have him at Colorado where he had some good games, but then as soon as he faced any semblance of a pass rush with his negative offensive line, I mean, he just didn't look good. And so it's he's totally matchup based, and it's hard. I mean, it's clear that he has tools, right? He's got a decent arm. He had a great receiving core. He had a great offensive coordinator that his dad fired halfway through the season, which was weird. So there's just a lot to me, I'm going to sell that because I'm just unsure at this point. I'm going to let other people take that risk on him.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, if we're talking about Devy purposes, I want nothing to do with him. If you're talking about C2C, obviously he has a little bit more viability there, but I mean, he's a backup quarterback in the NFL. That's all he's ever going to be. You look at it. Josh was joking earlier about how I'm probably going to mention my research at some point. Well, part of my research is looking at QBs and what are the important metrics for that. And I've talked about it a million times. I'm going to talk about it some more. It's big time throw rate and intended air yards. I feel like it's so easy to just look at those two things, and you can get a pretty damn good idea of who a quarterback is. And I can tell you, with 8.5 intended air yards and a 5% big time throw rate, He's a backup quarterback. He's a game manager at best. Like that's who he is. Now, that's not the entire profile. There's obviously more, but just when you see that, he's not pushing the ball down the field. It's a lot of dinks and dunks and stuff like that. I can see all that just from two metrics, so it's like, if I can see it, then imagine what somebody like Josh or Aaron that's sitting there actually grinding the film, what they can see. And I want nothing to do with Shedeur. If people are hyping him up and putting him up there just because of the name brand, like Colorado's the new hotness, obviously the Sanders name and everything, I'm perfectly fine selling and getting anything. In fact, I mean, if we want to, I know I put my stamp on Jackson Dart on the Full Tilt Devy pod, on the last pod that Josh was on. And, I'm sure the listeners were probably very surprised by where I drafted him. And that's fine. But I think that you could go get a Jackson Dart with a Shedeur Sanders. And right now it's going to be, somebody might be like, oh yeah, I'll definitely do that. Give me Shedeur. And then by the end of the season, they're going to be like, well, damn, I should have kept Jackson Dart,
Yeah. One of the things you talked about are, articles I've read with you, John, is you talk about SEC competition and players from the SEC, and then kind of looking at that and tilting things in their favor when they go to the NFL. And there's something about that, right? Like at any level, when you're playing higher level competition, you just get a better idea of how that's going to translate to the next level. With Shedeur, I mean, he's playing in the Pac-12, and again, like the competition isn't great. And when he does play good competition, the results aren't fantastic. So it's just harder to grade. And when you get to a guy like that, it's like, man, I'm just going to stay away from that. I'll let other people hype him up. And if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong and I'll have to eat that. But, I don't want to take risks. QBs are already hard enough to evaluate. When you have factors like we have with Shedeur, it makes it impossible for a guy like me. That's just, I don't have I'm not a former QB, evaluating this guy. So I'm going to stay away.
Yeah, and that's fair. And you're very right that QBs are just a hard position to evaluate for everybody. But like you said, there are some ways where we can at least make higher probability bets through some of the research that we can do. Well, maybe that was a softball for the first one, but this next guy I think will be a bit more debated. And that's Arch Manning, Texas quarterback, a guy who is not slated to start this season. But I mean, I guess who knows what's going to happen. Do you guys consider Arch Manning a buy or a sell?
Week four. I've been calling it for 2 years now. I mean, this is another player that we actually talked about, and I promise we didn't talk about every player, although we did talk about a lot of them. But I already know how Josh feels about him, so I guess I'll go ahead and start on this one and just say that I get all the talk of Quinn is proven. Quinn came back to run the team and all that kind of stuff, and I get that, and I've definitely learned over the past couple of years, 2 or 3 years of doing this podcast, that coaches are really unwilling to just move to the younger guy. It just doesn't happen as often as you might think, even though it did happen with the Caleb Williams, with Spencer Rattler. It can happen, but it's usually because that person is really struggling. And I do actually wonder if Quinn's going to truly struggle, because they've built like one of the best supporting cast for any quarterback to have, and it's going to be very difficult for him to truly struggle, except for his schedule is actually pretty damn tough. In fact, we have a Michigan matchup in week 2. I've been saying week 4. It might be week 3 when Arch Manning is starting here, because Quinn just completely falls apart against the national champions. I jokingly talk like that, but I honestly do think that Quinn is better but similar to a Shedeur, where I feel like he's kind of backup-esque. Maybe like a really high-end backup, like a Michael Penix Jr. or somebody like that, where like I feel like they could win a couple games for a team if you go in there, but they're not going to go up and like light up the scoreboard and win you a full season, take you to the Super Bowl or anything like that, unless you have some amazing team in the NFL. And that's how I feel about Quinn. That's how I feel about Michael Penix Jr. Just not necessarily comping the player, just kind of comping how I feel about them. And I feel like at some point, Arch is going to take over that team and, like be given that shot. So if he does struggle at all, then we definitely might see Arch. So I guess that's my very long-winded way of saying I do believe he's a buy, because there's still concerns from people. Quinn's going to be there the entire year. He came from a small school. He didn't look great in that spring game last year, yada, yada, yada. I think a lot of those answers or questions might be answered even in the spring game this year or something like that, and then it's going to be a little late, and so I would be buying him now.
Yeah, I mean, look, Arch. He's going to get every opportunity to succeed at this level and the next, right? And there's something about that, right? We talk about draft capital in the NFL, and players getting opportunities. I mean, the same thing with Arch. He's got the pedigree. I do think when he's got on the field, like he's shown a really good arm. And he's shown that he's got some ability to him. And so, I'm fascinated. I think the way they're handling his career coming from private school ball in, Louisiana to this level, it's going to take time for him to adjust. And they're giving him the time to do that. His family knows what they're doing. Sark knows what he's doing with quarterbacks. I like the way that they're letting him to develop and not putting a bunch of pressure on him. And I just think there's a lot of boxes to check. I mean, the box that you can check, I think he checks at this stage in his development. What actually happens, like we'll have to see, but I really like, again, like so far what we've seen, even when he got on the field, I thought he even like was better at this stage of his career than I thought he would be, or what he showed in the spring game, to be quite honest.
And I think that's fair as far as saying a lot of boxes are checked. He brings a lot to the table as far as just maybe that safety, but we just have not seen his production thus far at the college levels. We just really don't know, besides what he did in college, or sorry, in high school, how he's actually going to fare as a college passer. And that's why I think that, when you're taking him really early in a Devy startup, it's just like the risk is pretty enormous there. It's the same thing as drafting any freshman. And we've talked a little bit about, what is the risk of drafting a freshman. But like you said, great opportunity at Texas where they're building so much talent. Whether he has to wait another year, which I mean that's tough if you can't play your first 2 years, but still he should be at Texas. Even though I would be curious to see if there's going to be some rumblings of him transferring if things don't go his way in the spring. I guess you just don't really know. I still kind of doubt it. I think he is there, as you mentioned, Josh, for the long haul, but there's just a bit of uncertainty. And with the prices that I see him going at, I mean, maybe you start getting to the third round or so. Hey, I'm much more okay with that. But his price out there is fairly pricey. So I would consider myself more on that sell, not necessarily saying he's a bad player, but just how I feel about the current value in leagues.
Yep.
I will say that, I've seen multiple Devy mocks with him going in the first round. Josh took him in the first round, but he's a homer, so that doesn't really count, in our Devy mock on the full tilt. But if he's going as an obvious first round pick, then, he very well could be a sell. But then, we also know that's where the question becomes, when is the right time to draft these guys? And, because there's so few proven players in Devy right now, unfortunately, we're having to draft these projects and prospects and everything else a little earlier than maybe we did last year or the year before, like that kind of thing. And so I feel like, just like we're going to get into Nico I here in a second, and we're going to kind of be talking about the same thing. It's one game of production against a solid defense. Like when do you draft that player? And that's kind of what we're talking about with Arch. But like you said, I mean, he has a supporting cast. He has everything that you would want. So even if it is next year, they're kind of proving that like he's going to have every tool at his disposal when it is the time. And at least you can feel pretty good about that. Whereas with some of these other QBs, it's like, and who the hell's going to be there?
Right.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Yeah, totally.
So the next quarterback that we can talk about here, though, I think, like John mentioned, Nico Iamaleava, and I think that he's kind of this polarizing guy right now because he's another player going into his second year. He actually got on the field a little bit right at the end of the season, so we got to see some flashes. And he's projected to be their starter right away this year. And we know what Tennessee can do as a passing game. So it's really interesting to see a guy who's not yet to fill out that frame, but he does have a very promising, at least build upon, and just a lot of those scrambling and arm strength attributes that we really want to see at the quarterback position. Do you guys consider him more of a buy or sell, considering he might be going in the late first to early second in a lot of Devy startups and mocks?
Think he's getting to the point of being a sell just because like people are already kind of falling in love with him and he's still unproven and everything. But kind of like going back to what we were saying about Arch, he's in a good system. We haven't really seen enough of it, but he was a 5-star prospect, great prospect. And the one game that we did see, he was literally up against the best defense in all of college, basically. So we can't even say that that's necessarily, even though he didn't look amazing. He did score a bunch of touchdowns. Had 3 rushing touchdowns. He actually had 1.31 PPR points per touch, which is like elite. Now it's a small sample, is one game, but that's just showing his ability, at least in fantasy purposes, if not for actual like NFL purposes and stuff like that. Now the intended air yards, the big time throw rate, that was low, but once again he was going up against one of the best defenses in the country, so it's not that crazy to think that this true freshman kind of struggled, yada yada yada. That's my only issue is he still is unproven, even though we've seen some things that we do like. He has athleticism, he has a strong arm, he has all that kind of stuff, but he is completely unproven. So if people are just forcing him into that first round, then at some point you probably do have to say like he can be a sell. But then once again, like I said with Arch, there's not that many proven options. So who are you selling him for? So I guess technically I would call him a buy. But it's really going to be like price dependent when it's all said and done.
Yeah, it's hard. QBs again, they're hard to evaluate, and it's hard to buy unproven QBs in the first round. And I think that's like when you look at the Devy landscape right now, it feels like a transition year. John and I have talked about this before, but it's like that's why some of these guys are going so high that are unproven, is that there's just not a lot of proven guys that you're like, I'm going to stake my claim on. Like Nick Singleton, like who we'll talk about later, but it's like he's like all these guys kind of have like holes that you can poke in their game in different ways. And so I'm a huge fan of Nico. I mean, I think as much as it's hard to evaluate success in the NFL, it's not hard to evaluate what traits the NFL is looking for, right? They want mobility, they want a strong arm. JJ McCarthy. You can argue about whether JJ McCarthy is a good QB or not. Is he going to get draft capital? He'd probably be picked in the first round. And that's because he has traits, even though he hasn't proven to me a ton on the field. Nico, to me, is not JJ McCarthy as far as what he's even proven yet, but he's got traits, right? Like we saw he can run. He in the spring game, if you go back and watch that, he makes some throws that's like, holy cow, the zip on that ball and the placement on that ball was incredible. And he's got some things. He's going to be in a system and with Josh Heupel, he's gonna put up numbers. Now the real question is like, can he read a defense? And I think in the NFL right now, you got to ask the question: does that even matter? Like half these guys come in, they can't read a defense, and they're killing it until the NFL figures him out. That's a whole nother conversation. But the traits, at least what people are looking for, the Desmond Ritters of the world, even though he's a bust, like he had traits and he got picked in the second round. So I think Nika is going to get that draft capital because he's got those traits and he's going to have production at Tennessee.
Yeah.
He's a buy for me.
Oh, there you go. There it is. I would also put him more in that buy rather than sell, just because some of the differences we're talking about between like an Arch and a Nico. I mean, they're both second-year guys, but yeah, we're going to see Nico start right away, and we're going to see the traits, and we're going to see all of those types of things, and another year for him to develop in college. So I think he might get there sooner, but there's always risk with that. So it's somewhat price dependent, like John says, as always. But are there any other freshmen well, not necessarily even freshmen, just any sort of quarterbacks that you guys want to discuss here, or should we move on to the running backs?
I think somebody for me, like a freshman, that's interesting to me. I kind of how I start my process with high school seniors coming into college is I usually start with the all-star games because I want to say, again, it's kind of the benchmarking equal talent. And Walker White from Auburn was like really intriguing in the Army All-American game. again, he can run a little bit. He's got a good arm. And he's going to come in with like 3 of the top 10 wide receivers and Hugh Freeze as his coach. I mean, there's enough there that, like, I don't know, honestly, where Walker White's going right now. But if he's like a 7th, 8th round guy, he's a guy that I would throw some, he's a guy I would buy if he's going in that range. If he's like 3rd, 4th round, yeah, I'm not going to touch that because he's a freshman. But he's a guy that I'm intrigued with just because he's going to come in with so much talent. He's got some tools to work with. And so in that way, he's intriguing to me as a guy that if I can get him at a good, if he's a value, then he's a guy I would want to go after.
I'll be super intrigued to see what Walker White's startup ADP is, things like that, because like you said, I mean, he might be under the radar, but you get enough people starting to talk about him and the weapons there. I think he's going to rise to what I would consider to be a sell at some point. I'm just going to predict that this offseason, only because, I mean, the guy has a 56% pass completion percentage for his career in high school. It's kind of low. Like, the guy is not super accurate, but you can also point to a guy like Caleb Williams, who was not actually that accurate in high school either. So it's not the end all be all. And it's just very interesting that he's going to have those weapons at Auburn, where it's like, Auburn again, is that a place that we want quarterbacks to develop and play? But at least he has some talent at the wide receiver position, which I actually am a little bit lower on some of those Auburn incoming guys. But if they get Ryan Williams too, I mean, game over.
Yeah.
They get so good.
Kind of factoring Ryan Williams into that a little bit, but
right. At this point, I think that Ryan Williams, I'm just leaning towards him going back to like Alabama or somewhere else. But I mean, who knows, right? Auburn and Alabama are the 2 front runners. So,
Texas trying to sneak in there. Little plug.
Yeah. I wonder how high Walker White will jump up once he gets his nickname Heisenberg, from Walter White and all that kind of stuff. Once that happens, it's to the moon.
It's over.
It's over. But going back to JJ McCarthy real quick, if you want to learn about JJ McCarthy, I actually have an article coming out on DLF, I believe tomorrow, about McCarthy. So that'll be a good way to hear about him. And then real quick, I wanted to look up where Nico I is on the DLF rankings, because that's where I was saying, like, price dependent. And it's kind of exactly what I was thinking, because 2 of the rankers have him in the 20s, like 20th overall, whatever. But 2 of the rankers have him at 7 and 8. And so if he's at 7 and 8, he's a sell. If he's at 20, he's a buy. And that's why, like, it sounds like a cop out for saying price dependent, but like people are willing to take him super early. He's the actual QB1 for DLF's Devy ranks, consensus ranks. So, it shows you how high he is already. And then, but there's also, you see a little bit of a discrepancy there with some of the ranks and everything. So not everyone's on board, but some people are. And that's why it just gets really tough to call someone a clear buy or sell at that point,
That's a really good point, man. Yeah, because I'd buy him at 20, but 7 or 8.
I can see
exactly.
that.
Of course.
And then some of the sites. So I mean, I'm a ranker now at Campus to Canton, and I mean, I haven't updated my ranks, to be honest. Like, in the last few weeks here, it's been a while, right? I'm still kind of waiting for some of these pieces to settle in, and I'll be doing that in the next week or two. But it's like going off of some of the consensus ranks, things like that right now on there. It's just not going to be fully updated, or at least for myself. So could be the same thing on DLF. You'll probably see a guy like Nico rise up for sure. So that's probably the price we're anticipating. But Josh, you mentioned Nick Singleton, and maybe let's just transition to the running backs and see, what do you think? Buy or sell with Nick Singleton, a Penn State running back?
Yeah, well, so I got him at RB2 in that Devy startup this last, a couple weeks ago in the mock that we did. And I think if that's where I'm getting them, like, I'm going to buy him. This is before Trevion Henderson declared. We all thought he was gone, so he wasn't in that. And so, Nick Singleton, he's the one guy, again, other than Trevion, that he's got some an elite trait about him, right? He's big and he runs a 10.8 100 meter. And he's just twitchy, like, he's got some twitch to his game. and he got a little bit better in the pass game this year. So I'm gonna buy him. But look, like other than Trevion Henderson, who I really do like him, like can poke holes in almost every other running back that's being drafted in the first round. And so I'm just like, it's tough. Like it's tough landscape out there right now, in my opinion.
It absolutely is. And like I've always been kind of anti Singleton just because it was he was an unproven player that was pushed up to RB1 by like everyone. And I just was like, I can't do it. Now that's not even like me technically tooting my own horn, because I had Quinshon Judkins at one for at least for, not overall, because I always had Trevion and those guys ahead of him, but for that class I always had, for the 25 class, I always had Quinshon ahead of Singleton, and now I'm actually I've switched them again. So like if anything I was wrong, but I was kind of right, just because like I feel like Singleton never became the player that people wanted him to become, or he hasn't done it yet. Maybe he'll do it this year, and that would be great. But right now he's just a project, a la JJ McCarthy or whoever, but for running backs. And then now we've seen some projects like Isaiah Pacheco work out just because of speed and athleticism and stuff like that. And I mean, he should be better than that anyway, but even if he's not, he still has those things. And so like I don't hate him. I never have hated him. I just didn't really like him being number one in the class, when I really never felt like he had done enough to actually be the number one. And so I feel like nothing has truly changed for me. It's just now I've kind of come around and been like, I don't like Quinshon as much. And so now Singleton's back to one.
Yeah.
And Nick Singleton is just, like Josh was saying, just such a freak where I truly think that he's going to go to the NFL Combine, even if he still had kind of another meh year at Penn State. And we're just all going to forget about that. And we're going to say, hey, that system, that for whatever reason, that running system was not fitting him well. And some NFL team is going to identify him as a player they can at least get the ball to, right? Because he just is so big and fast and athletic. And he's capable as a receiver too. Like, this guy is not a slouch. And I think that makes a big difference at the end of the day. So,
Yeah.
That's my thoughts with Nick Singleton. I do consider him a buy in the context of he's going in the second in a lot of places.
We're getting some feedback or noise or something.
Feedback.
I don't know what that's from, but yeah, I guess I never actually talked about if he was a buy or sell. But like I said, I think that if I don't know, I feel like I'm copping out on all these answers, but like I feel like if someone says 100% Nick Singleton is the RB1 in the class, like that kind of thing, I think I'm fine selling him. But if he is is being considered like RB2, RB3, or like closer to those guys, then I don't have him as a sell as much. But yeah, I'm getting some bad feedback. I don't know about you guys.
I'm not getting any on my end.
Yeah.
What is the? You are? Uh-oh.
But
It might be me.
I muted it. So, or I muted myself. Sorry. So,
all right, it's better now. Sorry about that, guys.
I think it's me. My bad. Let me see if I can fix some stuff real quick.
Sounds good.
All right, Aaron. So you were talking about Singleton.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, ultimately, I still see him as a buy, especially when you can get him in the second round. So I was just on the Back to Devy podcast, and we just did a mock, and I don't want to give away all the results from that mock, but I was able to get him a little sneak peek, I guess. I was able to get him in the mid second, and I think that's a very fair value right now. So it just really depends, like all these guys will talk about, but I do consider a lot of people are going to sour on him. I still think we just got to bet on that athletic profile and for him to find that right spot when he gets to the next level. So yes, do I want him to take a big step forward this year in efficiency? Absolutely. But I will accept him as a buy right now.
Yeah, and I think, and once again, I'm looking at the DLF ranks, and like Tet McMillan, who I profess my love for at this point, is going one spot ahead, or is ranked one spot ahead of Singleton. I feel like as long as Tet is gone, then I'm fine buying him, or drafting him at that price, or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, if Tet's still on the board, I can't do it. And I feel like at that point we have question marks about almost every single player that you could possibly draft. And so I really have no issues drafting a guy like Singleton or paying those prices for a guy like Singleton that, yes, has question marks, but everyone has question marks there.
Yeah, that's fair. How about another running back? And this is one of the unique guys who ended up coming back to college. So Devin Neal, Kansas running back. We all thought he was going to declare. It's a weak running back class, right? Well, he must not have got that great of feedback from the NFL. And that is, to me, a little bit concerning. I still think there's people who still believe in him. They think that, he's going to break out even more this coming season. I'll just say right away before you guys go, I am selling him, or at least trying to sell him if I have him. It's not like I'll sell him at any price, but to me, I just don't think that he is going to stick out with this next group of running backs that looks way more talented than this year's. I mean, what's he going to do in one more season to really catapult up to the tier of like Travion and Quinshawn and even like a Nick Singleton, who we just talked about? So that's my quick thoughts on Devin Neal.
How are you doing microphone wise?
You think we get? Do y'all see here feedback or?
A little bit. It's better now.
Okay, might be. Yeah, it's never happened before, but it might be like my water heater or something. I don't know.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, with Devin Neal, I think that's a really good point, Aaron. Seems like kind of a bad decision to come back. Obviously didn't know Travion was going to come back, but it's like this next draft class seems to be a little bit better potentially than like right now, where it seems like, you have a few guys that might stick out, but I feel like Devin Neal could have had day 2 draft capital this year. And it's like, why not go to the NFL at that point? So yeah, sometimes staying around like that can actually hurt you in the long run.
Yeah, I have him as a sell. He now obviously you get dinged a little bit by being a senior in the model compared to a junior, so him making the decision to come back is dinging him a little bit. But he is, I mean, he was never that high anyway, except for like I think he had like one or two big blow up games at the beginning of the season, and he kind of skyrocketed up the ranks, and then he fell back to earth like each individual game after that. But I was looking at DLF's ranks once again. They have him as RB12 overall in Devy right now, and that's probably pretty accurate, I would say. That feels like how people feel about him. I actually have him as RB20 in my ranks, so I mean, technically he is a sell just by looking at it that way. But even then, like I'm not the biggest Devin Neal fan. Like I've been intrigued by him at times, but like nothing truly stands out as amazing. He has decent size, he has decent athleticism, he has a decent receiving profile. Like nothing is truly making me go like I really have to stake my claim on this guy. I have to have him on my team. And so if people are drafting him or paying RB12 prices in Devy, I'm definitely willing to sell.
Yeah, good points all around there. And then another running back who's interesting, and this is definitely going to be for some different reasons, but Trevor Etienne, going from Florida and transferring into Georgia, transferring into a big time program there. And I think it's an exciting move, but what do you guys think? Do you consider Etienne a buy or a sell?
I think you got to have him as a buy. I mean, he's going to a running system, like a system that wants to put out or has put out great running backs in the past. They've been kind of falling off recently, but I think it was more just they kind of had a dry spell of talent, and then like Branson Robinson got hurt, Roderick Robinson got hurt, I believe. Like they haven't quite had the greatest luck there. And then Kendall Milton's like one of the most overrated players ever. So But I think look at what Trevor Etienne did at Florida, in not necessarily a full workhorse role or anything like that, but I think he's kind of proven that he can do it. He has the size, he has the athleticism, 10% big time run rate the past couple of years. Like I love to see that. So he's showing the big playability, the explosiveness that we love to see. But like I said, he has the size and the athleticism. So now he's going to a program that's most likely going to showcase his abilities. Like, why are you leaving Florida to go to Georgia unless you're completely guaranteed you are at least the 1A if not just the one altogether. And like I like Roderick Robinson. I liked Branson Robinson at one point, but I don't think that we have to worry about him this year at the very least, or at least the beginning of the season. And I don't think there's anyone else of like true consequence besides maybe a freshman that you guys might tell me about or something like that. Once again, I haven't done that research yet. So beyond a freshman that's probably never going to see the field, I think that it's going to be the Trevor Etienne show. And I mean, I have him extremely high in my ranks now. So yeah, I would say he is a buy unless someone is as crazy as I am.
Yeah, I mean, look, Etienne has been a guy at Florida that's just like popped off the tape. As as soon as you put it on, it's like he's always making plays. It's frustrating that he's not getting more run there. So it's great to see him to go to Georgia, right? And I think I agree with all those points. I probably am not going to be as high on other people. Like I'm not going to draft him in the first round of a Devy draft, but that might be a huge mistake because his potential is just unbelievable. So, a little bit of a question on his like long speed, but like how much does that really matter with a running back? Like I don't know. You can get into that, but Trevor Etienne, man, I mean the guy, his contact balance is fun to see, and he's a good running back, and I think put him behind that Georgia offensive line, it's gonna be fun to watch.
Yeah, and I'm certainly excited for him. I would consider him a bit more of a buy, but I think with the hype that he's going to get, if he's starting to go in the late first, I mean, at that point, I might cool off. But for now, he's a buy. But speaking of guys who have some controversy to them, Raheem Sanders going from Arkansas to South Carolina now? That's going to be an interesting move, especially in a guy who just is coming off just a disastrous season. Do you guys consider him at this point a buy or a sell?
One of the things that I was really I consider him a sell, and here's why. One of the things that I was concerned about last year, and I wish I would have been more vocal about it in spring ball, is when he gained all that weight. I think he got up to like 237, and then like I was so intrigued to watch that spring game to see what he was going to look like at 237 versus 225, and he looked bad. But I was so afraid to go against consensus on that, and I should have spoke up more. And like I don't know. I mean, at this point, I don't see him going to South Carolina and like killing it. Like I don't even think. I think before he was priced. Like I loved Rocket Sanders when he was coming in. Like I'm a CFF. That's my background. Loved him as like a dynasty player in that. But like pretty raw as a runner. I mean, even when he did well, I thought what he did well with was he was just extremely physical, like for his size, and he had some athleticism, but he was still learning how to play the running back position. And so I think at this point, it's like, I don't know if he's any better, and he's not super fast. I mean, that was really never his game. And he better get down to 225 or he doesn't. To me, he's not even like maybe a late day 3 pick at this point, but I'm pretty off of Rocket Sanders. I mean, that South Carolina move was kind of the nail in the coffin for me as far as, him being a sell.
Yeah, this time I'm looking at 2 different sites because like Aaron said, maybe not all ranks are updated or anything like that. So I just wanted to make sure before I put my 2 cents in. DLF has Rocket as RB11 consensus wise, and CampusToCanton.com has him as RB8. That seems wild. And if those are the prices, he's absolutely a sell. I do not have him anywhere close to that. But I mean, the thing is, like, I want him to succeed so bad, and it's probably just because I watched him technically break out at the Outback Bowl the year prior to his big sophomore season and everything. So I got to watch him like I said, kind of like his breakout game because he hadn't really been used all that much before that. And it was like I texted Aaron before, and it was before I truly got into like prospects and like the freshmen and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, who do I need to be looking for? He said, oh yeah, you want to look for Rocket Sanders. And I was like, okay. And then I watched him live. And so ever since then, I've been rooting for him, traded for him in a couple spots. I have him in some spots, but if I can still get RB8 prices, I think I'm selling.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I actually think that his value has dipped more than some of those rankings show. So I tend to disagree just a little bit, only for this reason. So last offseason I had him as a sell. I was like, I'm not comfortable with him anywhere near like a Travion Henderson valuation. I just didn't see him quite as that type of athlete or anything like that. But then, as his value has continued to plummet and go down and down and down, and I get that it's rebounded a little bit, right? There's some hope. Maybe he can return to that form. If it simply was just an injury thing and then, the weight gain on top of that, I, I just know that some of these strength and conditioning programs, they can work with a kid to try to get back some of that athleticism. It's not like it's gone forever. He has to work, right? I mean, he has to be really motivated to get back to that previous self. But I mean, the guy had 1,400 yards and 28 receptions for 271 receiving yards in his second year in college, and he was very efficient with it. That's intriguing upside. And if you can get him at a discount, I mean, I'm trying to buy. I just don't know how much of a discount there truly is. It's really hard to say at this point in the off season. But I'm just going to put some feelers out there, right? Potential buy, I'll say. So that's where I fall with Rocket Sanders.
Like
But
I said,
I'm gonna.
I don't
Yeah.
hate
Yeah, I
it.
like it.
I
Yeah, I
I
like
don't
it.
hate it at all. Like I want to believe in the players, so I definitely I don't. But you were saying how obviously it seems like the team kind of let him down at Arkansas, and people have been questioning why did he transfer to South Carolina. I mean, what if it's just to get away from that team? What if it's to get away from the strength and conditioning coaches and like those kind of guys? Like, I mean, I have no idea. This is 100% speculation, but what if that's because everyone's like, oh, it's a lateral move. Okay, well, then why is he making a lateral move? Maybe there's a reason for it. So maybe we have some hope in the speculation of that, and or maybe it's just me, like hoping that my two shares are not completely dead.
Hey, that's fair to speculate.
Yeah.
I'll speculate. Maybe he had like an aunt or uncle out there, really good cook, and it's just best for him to move away from that, right? But we'll see. But I do want to clump a couple of running backs together here just to save on some time, and I just view these guys as somewhat interchangeable at this point for different reasons. Not everybody will have these guys in the same tier, but I think that Jordan James, Oregon back, Ollie Gordon, Oklahoma State back, Amarian Hampton, UNC back, and Damian Martinez out at Oregon State. I just think that those guys are kind of all interesting, and they fall in that tier of like nobody really loves them as like a top 3 type of guy in the class. It doesn't seem, at least, or at least not a top 2 guy. But I mean, a lot of people like them to varying levels. It's just like, where do we put them? And do we consider any of these guys strong buys or strong sells?
I'll go ahead and start here. I think that the clear and obvious one, and actually I drafted him on the draft mock that we did, the Devy mock that we did a couple weeks ago, and it was Damian Martinez, and Josh was like, "Take him, I don't want him," like you could tell. But and I get that there's the issue of the whole Pac-2, and is he going to be in a G5 program now, or G6, or whatever the hell it's called now? And like, I get all that, but I wonder if he did enough at a P5 level to where like he's already on people's radars, like he's already on the NFL's radars and all that kind of stuff, to where it's not quite the same as if he was just at G5 or wherever he's going to be. I have no idea like exactly what Oregon State is doing, but I think that I think he's proven to be a quality player. I guess the question would be all those other like ancillary questions and all that kind of stuff. How does he answer those, and how does Oregon State figure out whatever the hell Oregon State is doing? Then Amarian Hampton, I'm not the biggest fan of. In fact, I would call him a sell if we're just like trying to keep it shorter, because you're clumping all these guys together. Like I like Hampton, but I mean, I've heard people talking about him being closer to the top, like like top 3, top 4, and I can't do that. So if that's the case, he's a sell. If he's some kind of value somewhere, then obviously he's a buy. But like just from what I'm hearing from different pods and all that kind of stuff, he's a sell. And then Ollie Gordon, I feel like is like one of those players that has done everything that you could possibly want a player to do, except for he's at Oklahoma State, and so people are like, yeah, he sucks, like, because it's Oklahoma State. And so I feel like I'm going to end up being higher on Ollie Gordon than a lot of people. So I would call him a massive buy. And I get that it's not, I get that, they haven't produced the best players, but they've had some decent ones, but I just feel like this is different. Like, he just seems different, and maybe I'm wrong, but yeah, give me all the Ollie Gordon, and Jordan James can get out of here. Jaden Lamar to the moon, baby.
What do you think, Josh?
That was incredible. Yeah, Amari and Hampton's a tough one for me. I was huge on him coming into college. Got lots of, again, college fantasy football dynasty shares. I love his 10-900 meter, 220 pounds. But again, like, he had horrible vision his freshman year, and he did better in his own scheme this last year. And that was really good for him. But we'll see. I think there's still questions. I think he's still growing. I think where he's currently going, he's past where I'm comfortable taking him in a Devy, because I don't think he's a supernatural running back. Like, I'll put him in the same tier as like a Damian Martinez, where, yeah, I mean, I think Damian, look, if Chris Rodriguez can be decent for the Washington Redskins in some spot up duty, then like, Damian Martinez is going to have a good NFL career. But I'm looking for, in the ranges that these guys are going, I'm looking for like traits, like elite traits. And I don't know, like, if Amari Hampton or Damian Martinez is quite at that level for me. I'd rather take a shot on somebody like even though I didn't do this, but like a Donovan Edwards, that's just going to, like, he's got some elite things that he does that the NFL is going to love. Whether that's good enough to overcome his deficiencies, I don't know. But what he does is elite. And so there's guys like that I think. Sorry, I just saw that we're talking about him next. Maybe I just creeped into the next one here. But yeah, so the rest of these guys, man, I'm probably going to sell on their price range, to be honest.
Yeah, that's fair. And, I don't necessarily have to go over all those guys in depth again. I think you guys covered it pretty well. I actually don't feel too strongly on Hampton because, like, I think you both make good cases for like why he's a good player, but he could still be kind of overpriced currently. Damian Martinez kind of in that middle zone where, I mean, he has decent value to his name. I like him. John and I have pretty much always liked Damian Martinez. He's just such an underrated guy coming out. And then Ollie Gordon just coming out of nowhere and crushing the season. I'm kind of interested in him. I just need to do a little bit of a deeper dive before I fully endorse him as a buy, but I lean more towards buy compared to sell. And then Jordan James, actually, that's my biggest buy of this group if his ADP continues to be suppressed. So once he starts creeping up into that, like, third round range, I mean, that's too early because he has not fully done it, but like, what he did this season was so underrated, and it was just very, very efficient in a backfield where Bucky Irving, I mean, he was getting a large workload, but Jordan James was also siphoning off carries consistently, and he was more efficient in some measures than Bucky Irving at a bigger size, right? I mean, you'd think that the more explosive, smaller guy might be a little bit more efficient at times, but Jordan James at 205 plus, running at over 7 yards per carry and even being involved in the passing game. And now he has a whole backfield to himself. I just think that Jordan James is a screaming buy, but maybe people are catching on, right? I've seen his value, or at least people talking about him now. So he'll get to the point where I cool off on the buy, but until then, I am buy on Jordan James. So, but Josh go ahead.
No, just to put it out there, because I do joke about Jordan James and Jaden Lamar quite a bit. I actually do have Jordan James ranked ahead of Jaden Lamar, but it's just become a fun bit at this point. So like now I'm so rooting for Jaden Lamar to just run away with the show. And I mean, they're not that far apart to where it's not like insane that it would happen. So I'm like I said, Jaden Lamar to the moon, baby.
I think that would be absolutely insane. But if it happens, props to Beth, right? I will never question Beth again. So
That's right. That's right.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But we dropped a little Donovan Edwards hint there. I think that we got to go to him next, just because he is a guy. I think he's actually similar to like Nick Singleton in a lot of ways, where the talent, the pedigree, the recruiting pedigree, and some of the high end flashes that you see is just so tantalizing. It's like, why can't we take a shot on this guy? He's like the discount Nick Singleton in some ways. But do you consider Donovan Edwards to be a buy or a sell at this point?
Well, since Josh already kind of talked about him, I guess I'll go ahead and talk about him. I think that like I've always loved Donovan Edwards. You have as well. It sounds like Josh has as well. And we saw those flashes in that championship game. I have no idea why it took them to the championship game for it to happen. Obviously, you've expressed concerns about him, with a knee injury, knee surgery, like stuff like that, Aaron, in the past, and so it very well could have taken until that point to just be healthy enough to do whatever. But I feel like he's going to get his shot this year. The offensive line should still be great. If anything, he should. And I also drafted him last year very highly and thought he should have been great for my C2C squads, and he was not. So I think that he should be able to gain value back. Maybe he's never going to become that top tier guy now, just because he has proven to have some possible vision issues and things like that. But I think that, kind of like we were talking about with Nicholas Singleton, teams are going to fall in love with that athleticism, the receiving ability, stuff like that. He's probably still going to be drafted pretty damn high. I think you have to have him as a buy, because there's still enough people out there just saying, hey, like he's not who we thought he was, and get him off my team. Now, that being said, you would have been much better off buying him before the championship game, but you gotta come up with that belief a little earlier. But I still think that you can probably squeeze him into a trade, maybe a 2-for-1 kind of deal or something like that. Like a 1-for-1 trade might be difficult right now because everyone else saw the same championship game, and so a 1-for-1 kind of deal. But maybe you try to tier down from a Nicholas Singleton to a Donovan Edwards plus, or something, like doing something like that. You can probably get that trade done.
Yeah, I mean, again, like there's gonna be some, like you said, there's gonna be some team they're gonna fall in love with them, and if he gets in the right system, right, that's gonna, like the way that Lions use Jahmyr Gibbs, and he can run some outside zone, and he can catch 50, 60, 70 passes. Like, that guy is going to be fantasy gold. It's just going to have to be the right fit. And, again, he has his limitations, but the NFL is not even using workhorse running backs a ton these days. And so it's like, he fits in with the categories, and I think what he does is elite. You get that guy in open space, and we saw it. He's gone, right? Like, that was one of his runs against Washington, was like, he ran into the back of his offensive line, because he couldn't see the hole, and then he takes a couple steps back, and then he outruns the whole defense. What do you do with that? There's a level of eventually just talent takes over, and I don't know. I mean, you could argue he's a bad fit for the system at Michigan, but in the NFL, he'll be in a better system for him.
Yeah, you'd think so, but that was just such a funny run. It's such a classic Donovan Edwards move. But I like the fact that, yes, he's finally starting to look healthy. So there's reason for optimism. I do consider him a buy as well. So I think it's buy here for the three guys. We'll skip ahead to Ashton Jeanty, Boise State running back. And he is just a guy who's just really interesting because of that strong receiving profile. I'll just be right up in front and get it out of the way. I consider him a nice buy in Devy leagues, but what do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I put him on here just because he's the guy. I'm going to be on a mission to get this guy escalated into sell territory for everybody else. But I just think he is incredible. I think he's my RB4 or 5, maybe 5 or 6 now with Henderson back. I haven't adjusted my rankings yet. But I just like his receiving profile. Like you talked about, his yards per route runner, double any other running back out there. His yards per contact, per attempt, yards after contact per attempt. is like a 4.5. I mean, he's like number 3 of running backs that are, 100 attempts last year. And so, G5 running backs, you have to be elite, right, in order for us to really consider you. But he's that, and he's 210, right, which is a great. You have Kenneth Walker, that's 212. I mean, you have these backs that are definitely succeeding at that weight in the NFL. And I just think, again, like, we're just hyping up Donovan Edwards and his receiving skills. Well, Ashton Jeanty was a wide receiver in high school, and that's obvious when he goes out and he does it, and he can run. He can also run inside. He runs really hard, maybe too hard for his size. I mean, that's the one knock, is that like maybe he'll be eventually hurt himself with the way that he runs so violently. But you just love to see what he does on the field. I mean, it's just incredible. So he's a buy for me until I don't know. I don't know if he'll ever not be a buy for me at this point.
That's how I get about players. It's just like, no, you can't raise him up high enough. I don't want to talk too much about Jeanty. I mean, he is a G5 guy and everything. I will say that I'm extremely high on him as well. Not quite as high as Josh. I have him as RB8. So I mean, I'm pretty damn high as well. So I would say
that's pretty high.
I would say that he's a buy as well. I'm looking here. He's going as RB16 on Campus to Canton. He's RB, I think it was 14 on DLF. So if I could find him, RB14 on DLF. So if we're saying 8 and 5, then I definitely would call him a buy.
There you go. Yeah, no, I love it. The guy's going to be awesome at the next level, it seems, even though some people are going to doubt that just because of the G5 thing, but at some point we have to say he's just that good. And honestly, Boise State has a track record of putting guys in the NFL who are decent producers for sure.
And they just got Malachi Nelson. Like, their team should be even better this year. Like, I don't see things not being better for Jeanty, for the team, for everything. Even if Malachi is not necessarily the QB that we thought, he should be better than Taylon Green or whoever the hell they were putting out there.
That's fair.
Yeah, Jeanty did that with no passing game, and so yeah, absolutely. I love that take.
I hate everyone in the Devy and C2C community for making me think that Taylon Green was good, because I drafted him in supplemental drafts because everyone was like, he's gonna be a stud, you have to have him. And why people? Like, I never really even truly looked into it because people were so vocal about it. I'm like, he's here, I gotta draft him. And then I freaking drafted him. I'm like, why? What did I do to you? Why are you putting this out in the ether? Like, come on.
There's nothing worse. There's nothing worse than like not having seen a guy play and taking other people's word for it, and then you watch him for the first time after you already invested in him. You're like, oh, like, he's so bad. Like, I should never trust anybody ever.
That's how it felt for sure.
Speaking of guys that you've never seen play, freshman running backs for John. No, but Josh, you put a guy on here, Caden Durham, LSU running back, and for me, I have him very high in that tier 1. I do have quite a few tier 1 running backs actually in this class. Now, I don't necessarily do the same ranking as like the guys at Campus to Canton, where he's like hitting the certain grade. So like, for example, in this draft class, there's a bunch of guys who aren't even in tier 0, 1, or 2. There's like nobody up there for some of their rankers. And for me, I mean, I guess I don't use that system. I'm just saying, like, amongst the guys in this class, I think he's towards the top. I don't necessarily think that this is too bold to think that, but I consider him a buy just because I know it's not consensus by any means.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this before we came on. It's like, I don't see anybody talking about him, and I'm sure there are people. I'm just not tuned into it. But it's like, I mean, this is a guy that has some 10 to 100 meters to his name. I mean, he ran, even you take away the wind aided stuff, he ran a 10.28. He's got a 10.5 non-wind aided. I mean, that's crazy for a running back. He's 5'9", 195. I mean, that's what Jeanty was coming out. This kid played at Duncanville High School in Dallas. It's a 6A school. I mean, so he's playing elite competition. He averaged 10 yards per carry his senior year. And on like a lot of like 200 carries for like 2,000 yards. And that's kind of that metric that, you look for in recruits to see if they're going to be able to have an impact at the next level, a high level impact. So he's got that right? He's got I think it's like 16 catches for like 290 yards. So he's got some receiving chops too. Got good contact. I look for contact balance, speed, and then high school production of 10 yards per carry. Those are 3 big things I look for freshman running backs. And he checks those boxes. And it's like, look, like, I don't know if he's going to overtake Caleb Jackson right away, or, the other running backs that they got at LSU. But he's a guy that he's got traits, and like those traits for me are worth investing in, particularly if you're not going to have to spend a ton of draft capital on him, which I don't think you will this year.
Yeah, I obviously don't know anything about the freshmen yet. I have not looked into them. That is 100% clear. So I cannot say anything about the actual player himself, but I will say I feel like most people are fairly high on Caleb Jackson, myself included. And so if that's the case, and we've seen coaches and a lot of these teams be slow to move on to the youth, to the true freshmen, like those kind of players. And generally ends up being these like blue chip programs, where they don't do that. You see it at Alabama all the time, obviously. Even with LSU last year, they brought in a Logan Diggs, because they didn't really want to give it over to Caleb Jackson. And so, Jackson has the size, the athleticism, I believe, like he, at least in a small sample, he showed, he has that burst and speed and everything. So that'd really be my only concern. And that doesn't mean that it's a bad pick, because that just means next year or whatever, or maybe he can just get on the field a little bit. But like that's why, and I want to do more research on the freshmen and all that kind of stuff. But that's why, especially if we're talking about Devy, it's really difficult to draft a Devy running back, true freshman, like right then, that's not like highly recruited or highly ranked, isn't even going to see the field. Now, if you're talking about C2C leagues, it's a little different because obviously, bigger roster sizes and like you're trying to have that constant flow of talent, throughout years and that kind of thing. So it's a little different. But if we're truly talking about Devy here, like I kind of want to be out because I'd much rather be in on Caleb Jackson.
And while Caleb Jackson is super fun, I think it's possible to have multiple good running backs out of a program. And I think that's what we're going to be seeing here is just that Durham, just because Caleb Jackson might be the 1A doesn't mean that Durham is not extremely efficient and, takes over after a year or two. And we just don't know what the transfer portal, what's going to happen. I mean, Caleb Jackson could get benched for fumbling and transfer out. Like you really can't get too attached to the situation when it's so volatile nowadays. So I think that gives me a little bit more hope with some of these freshmen, but it can also be the opposite. And I'm just going to bring up some situations here. Texas, Georgia, and Alabama, they're bringing in these recruits, and I'm just going to quickly list them off for the people who are interested in some of these incoming freshman running back guys. So like for Texas, they're bringing in Jarek Gibson and Christian Clark. Georgia's bringing in Nate Frazier, Chauncey Bowens, Dwight Phillips, and Alabama's bringing in Kevin Riley and Daniel Hill. And using kind of that same argument that John just did, it's like, I mean, if there's good guys ahead of them already, how are these guys going to see the field? And I actually believe in most of those guys that I just listed off for Texas, Georgia, and Alabama. None of them are good enough to overcome the competition that's currently on those rosters. I don't think. I mean, you could make the argument for a couple of the Georgia guys because of their athleticism, but like even then, we just talked about a bunch of talented Georgia backs and how backed up that is there. I'm actually seeing those as guys that I'm willing to sell or at least not really heavily invest in a lot of those guys. And I know it's kind of a hater talking because that's entirely the whole incoming running back class for Texas, Georgia, and Alabama, like top end schools. But I'm just not into them, especially in this era of the transfer portal where, I mean, even if they're next up at Alabama, you're going to get a top guy transferring in there probably anyways. So that's kind of risky if you don't believe in those kind of middle tier freshmen, it's okay just to be out on them because we don't know what's going to happen in the future with transfer portal and competition.
It's just on this freshman class. I think this is the most uncertain class as far as RB1, RB2 that I've seen in years. I mean, usually there's a couple that Trevion Henderson, I took him as a freshman in CFF drafts. And like, oh, he'll come in. He's got talent. He can overtake that backfield. This year, I just don't you just don't see the path. Like Trevor Etienne's not getting overtaken by one of these dudes. Jarrett Gibson's not going to come in and, overtake Baxter or, Jadon Blue. So, so I think that's a really good point. Like I'm pretty uncertain. Even Taylor Tatum going to Oklahoma, like Gavin Sawchuk just looked unbelievable over the last 3 or 4 weeks. And so it's like, hey, the path to playing time is not very evident without an injury right now at a lot of these like schools where the top running backs are going to. So I like that point.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I won't necessarily like push back on some of that. I do think that Oklahoma's more wide open when you compare it to like, a Georgia or an Alabama or Texas right now. So I still like Tatum a bit, but how about let's get over to the wide receivers here. I don't want to exclude them because there's some interesting names. And right at the top, we got just a big guy, a big name, and that's Ted McMillan, who is staying at Arizona. He's not, at least at this time, transferring out to join his head coach. So what do you guys think? Are we still willing to buy Tet, or are we thinking he's a sell at this point?
Overall, number one Devy player. That's all you need to know. Buy him until he's that.
Before a couple weeks ago when I met John, I didn't know there's somebody as high as on T-Mac as me. At least before the bowl game, right? Like everybody after that was like talking about wide receiver 1. I'm like, no, you guys are not allowed on this bandwagon. That is unfair. Like I went on with Austin Nace and the CTC crew talking about Devy ranks last year, and I had a T-Mac wide receiver 3, and that guy looked at me like I was an idiot, and rightfully so, man, rightfully so. But like, there's just certain things about this guy, right? Like he gained 20 pounds between his freshman and sophomore year. On the GPS system, they're saying he hit 22 miles per hour, where he hit 18 miles per hour as a freshman. And then obviously you have all the stuff on the field that he's done. I mean, this guy is absolutely incredible. Like he's my wide receiver 1, in Devy, C2C, whatever. So I'm right there with John. This is when I knew that I had a new soulmate. So I appreciate you, John.
That's right. That's right.
I
mean, I will. I've always been with you. I want to say I had Tet at. It was definitely top 3. I want to say I had him at 3 going into last season, and a lot of people hated that. I mean, a lot of the Campus to Canton guys really hated that. And then like throughout the season, I listen to all their pods. I love those guys. I've been on their pods, not disparaging at all. But
yeah, I love them.
I listened to their pods throughout the season, and you could hear it. Every week they were like, he's creeping up a little bit more. He's creeping up a little bit more. And all of a sudden they had him, like they had to finally put him in their top 5. But you could tell they absolutely hate doing it though.
Yeah. And Ted McMillan, I'm not going to say anything more about him because I do think he's a buy until he gets some of that respect he deserves, being in that tier 1 at least, even if he's not at that wide receiver 1 spot. But I don't think that Luther Burden should be ahead of him. I just think that that's one example of something we don't see, but we don't need John to chime in there because we know he agrees with that. So let's go next to the Texas wide receivers. And I'm just going to list off a couple of guys there. I'm not even going to get into the freshman class, which is kind of talented, but Isaiah Bond transferring in from Alabama to Texas, Matthew Golden transferring in from Houston to Texas, and then Jonte Cook, just a second-year guy staying at Texas. And I think that's a really interesting room. It's going to be a fun wide receiver room this year. But what do you think of those guys? Like buy, sell, like what are we doing?
Yeah,
go ahead, Josh.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think overall, like I'm gonna buy Jonte Cook, and I think Isaiah Bond's gonna reach a level by the time people are listening to this podcast where I'm gonna sell him, just because like I think look, he runs a 10-700 meter. This kid's fast, right? Like he's got talent. He's pretty raw wide receiver. I mean, coming out, he was an athlete. And I think he's still learning the nuance of position. You can't teach speed, but like the nuances of route running, I think that just matters in the NFL and translating. And so I'm not sure. And I don't know. I need to do more research, and maybe you have this, John, on like his ADOT and stuff like that. But like Quinn Ewers does not throw a good deep ball. So if he's the guy, like, and Isaiah Bond is like making his money on deep shots, like, Xavier Worthy like got pinged for that a little bit. I mean, because he just can never hit him on a deep ball. And so I think Jonte Cook has, I think he's a good route runner. I think he's got more tools long term, but I do think Isaiah Bond's the wide receiver 1 this year. So it's a little bit, Jonte Cook's more risky. I'm willing to take more of a risk on him. I think Matthew Golden, like for me, is probably going to be a sell wherever he's at, even though I really like Matthew Golden to a certain degree. Like, I just don't think he's got any elite traits that are going to help him succeed at the next level. And I think he's wide receiver 3, at least this year for Texas. And maybe doesn't ever get past that with Ryan Wingo coming up as in 2025 when he hits the field.
Yeah, his ADOT is 8.3 yards. It's not great. It's Burden-esque, as we like to say here on this pod. And if you're right there with me on Tet, I'm right there with you on Golden. He is probably the biggest sell in all of Devy. Isaiah Bond's not that far behind him, though. I'd say I'm right there with you. Like, I think that people are going to get more hyped about the transfers coming in and kind of forget about Jonte Cook. And yet, like, there's really no reason to hate what Jonte Cook did or has, him as a prospect, all that kind of stuff. Everyone was super excited about him. Nothing has truly changed except for he has less competition now. And so I feel like we should at least feel like pretty confident with him going into this second year and that kind of thing.
Wow. So if you're listening to this podcast or watching live, you should just back it on up. I'm not going to say anymore. Just listen to these guys because they said what needed to be said there. I agree with all 3 of those Texas wide receivers. So we'll move on to Berrien Brown here, Kentucky wide receiver, and a guy. So like, there was a lot of hype going into this last season. He didn't necessarily live up to that. He disappointed. I think most would say at this point, but I still think that there's a lot of untapped potential there. He's a great returner. A lot of explosiveness to his game. He's a little bit raw. So you talked about that a little bit with Isaiah Bond. I mean, I'm not really comping them as players necessarily, but I still think that Berrien, he needs to work on his game. Absolutely. But I mean, some of the exciting game breaking abilities are there. So do you guys consider him, now that his value's dropped a little bit, to be potentially a buy at this point? Or is he still kind of a sell coming off of a disappointing season?
I think he can be a buy because I'm looking at DLF's ranks and they have Isaiah Bond 1 spot ahead of him. And so if that's the case, I'm selling Isaiah Bond and I'm buying Berrien Brown. I'd much rather have that. And when we talked about how Quinn Ewers isn't the greatest, obviously we know that Jalen Milroe isn't the greatest quarterback, but we can pretty definitively say that Devin Leary is a much worse quarterback than any of those guys. And so I feel like Berrien Brown never had a shot. He never had a chance. As bad as we think Will Levis is, or as bad as Will Levis is, not that we think, as bad as Will Levis is, Devin Leary is 1,000 times worse. And so like he never had a shot. I'm buying Berrien Brown. I might be talking on my ass because I'm hoping to God that somebody else is going to be the quarterback there this year. I haven't even like truly paid attention if they brought in a transfer or what, or is it still Devin Leary? Because now I'm scared.
Aaron, you want to tell him who it is?
No, Brock Vandegrift, which I actually
that's right. I do remember he came over.
Right. And I sound super disappointed saying that, but I know John, has a little bit of hope for him, I guess. I think Brock is super bad. But unfortunately,
we bet against the terrible players, and sometimes it works out where the not terrible players take over. So we're hoping and praying that it's going to be Vandegrift here.
Well, one of the things, you had Liam Cohen who came back as the OC last year. I had super high hopes for that Kentucky offense, just because I liked Cohen. I mean, I think I liked what he did with Tavion Robinson in the slot, and he loves to feature the slot receivers. And Berrien Brown, they just kept him on the outside, and it was kind of confusing to me because I felt like he could play some slot, and he just didn't. I mean, he played some, but not a ton. And I don't know. I mean, Berrien Brown is a sell for me just because I was high on him last year and I got burned, and I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know if I can go back to that well with a guy that I was already not sure about to begin with. And then I bought into him last year. And so now I'm thinking, I think I'm going to be back out. But look, like I think that the wide receiver position is really, really, really hard for me to evaluate. So, whatever I'm saying, you should probably say the opposite, because I just think that's a hard position for me. So, so Brown, I'll just be out on for now.
We were talking about Matthew Golden's 8.3 ADOT. Barry Brown's is the complete opposite. 16.6 was his average depth of target. Like, you have add a 16.6 ADOT and a terrible quarterback, and you're never going to complete passes. It's not going to happen. So I'm not saying that that's going to change. I guess at this point I can't guarantee it's going to change, but you would think that it's not Brown that's the problem. It's not Barry Brown that's the problem. And we bet on player talent. We don't bet on situations. So I'm still betting on Barry Brown.
Wow, you guys make some good good points there. It's really hard. You're trying to sway me one way or another, because I'm starting a little bit in the middle here, because I like his talent, right? Don't like his situation. Don't necessarily love what he did this last season, but like John is applying some really good context. And I don't know, Josh, your wide receiver takes thus far have been really, really good. So I don't know what you're talking about there, but I trust you. I'll be somewhere in the middle. How about that? So we're kind of tied. Buy, sell. You guys make that decision. But how about Kevin Concepcion? What do you guys think about the NC State freshman who really broke out this last season? Kind of an all-purpose player who was able to play in the backfield, get some touches, jet sweeps, and I think that is a big reason why his ADOT and his yards per reception was lower than what we'd like to see, was because of the usage. It's not because of the player, who he seems to be kind of an explosive guy, and I'm just really interested to see your guys' thoughts. I anticipate a step forward. I think he's a buy, unless, he's starting to go higher and higher in drafts, so there becomes a limit. But at this point, he's still under the radar for a lot of people in a lot of leagues.
Yeah, I like Concepcion. I thought that Concepcion was going to be that player that I was going to be like, haha, you guys didn't even know who he was, and blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, everyone just started talking about him and how amazing he is and this and that. But once again, it's Burden-esque. Like, it's a low ADOT player that did a lot with it afterward. And I don't want to hate those players. I really don't. But, those players generally are not great route runners. Those players are generally not great separators. They're not what I love to see in a receiver. And, it's just more Martavis Bryant or whatever, where it's just like they're a burner. They're truly athletic, but they're not really that great of a receiver, and that's not what I fall in love with. Now that being said, he's still high in Beth, so like he is not. I'm not saying he's terrible. I would much rather have him than like an Isaiah Bond or somebody like that we've talked about previously. But there's definitely some concerns. It wouldn't blow my mind for. Because now we have NC State bringing in Grayson McCall, like they're bringing in other transfers and everything. Like, they could easily be a completely different team this year. And what if it's not going to be all dinks and dunks? And if that's the case, Kevin Concepcion, take a step back to, like look more like a wide receiver 2 than a wide receiver 1, like that kind of thing. So I don't want to call him a buy, because I feel like there's too many people that are hyped on him. But I also don't necessarily want to call him a sell. I think he's kind of a hold. He's if you got him, hold him and hope for the best. If someone's willing to give you like top 5 wide receiver prices for him, then absolutely he's a sell. But other than that, I'm probably just holding.
Yeah, he's super interesting to me. His production profile does remind me a little bit of like a Rondale Moore, like with that super low ADOT. And NC State. So Robert and the OC there, he was at UVA, right? He's had some really productive offenses. He's using Casey and the what was the Billy Kemp role back in the day when Brennan Armstrong hit 4,400 yards. A lot of like kind of gadget type stuff. And look, with Noah Rogers coming in, Wesley Grimes, they got 2 4-star freshmen that are coming in. This wide receiver room is going to be stacked, and he's not going to have he's not going to have to prove that he can do more ADOT because they're going to keep him in the same role. I would like to see him transfer out. I think there's unknowns with Kevin Concepcion, in my opinion. Like with Tet McMillan, like his unknowns, I have those boxes checked, right? And what I don't like about Barry and Brown, what I don't like about KC is there's unknowns for me, and he's probably going to go higher than I'm willing to take on those risks. I'm not saying he can't overcome that, but like again, in that system, unless he transfers out and goes somewhere else where he can prove like a UT, a UT or some other system that he's going to be targeted downfield, those questions are going to remain for me.
Great points there. How about Nick Anderson or Nicholas Anderson at Oklahoma? Do you guys have any strong opinions on him? A little bit of a deeper name, right? A lot of Devy drafts he'll be available in, and he's under the radar. He's not going in the first 4 rounds of drafts, that's for sure, or at least from what I've seen.
He's kind of the complete opposite for me, where like he's the big play guy, 4.68 PPR points per touch. Like that is unbelievable. Now, he's I want to say that he only had, let me see. Actually, no, he ran 328 routes. He had 798 yards. I mean, it's not even necessarily like a small sample trap or anything like that. I was thinking that he had a lesser season than he really did. But 21 yards per reception. I love that simple stat, but it just shows athleticism in a simple stat, which I love to see. And then, like that PPR points per touch, you're never going to get me to hate a player that can score that many fantasy points in one touch, in one play. And so, yeah, I'm kind of all about Nick Anderson. And I mean, you're talking about Oklahoma, you're talking about Jackson Arnold that people are, excited about. Like, is there any reason to think that this is not going to continue or be a good thing for Nick Anderson? I think I'm all about him. I would definitely label him as a buy. I don't necessarily have an idea of like how other people feel about him, so I can't really say how, if I'm higher or lower than other people, but I would think that I am higher.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Nick Anderson reminds me a lot of Marvin Mims with his hyper efficient production there at Oklahoma. Now, totally different players, right? Like, nothing that's similar between them, but he's just so Nick Anderson's a fascinating profile in my opinion, because like he wins deep, but I'm not sure how he wins deep other than he's a pretty good route runner, and I think that matters. I mean, it's not like, I don't think he's going to come out as like this like crazy burner, so he's very interesting to me. I think like what you're saying, John, like I don't think he's gonna like creep into the first 3 rounds or 4 or 5 rounds even of like a Devy draft or a C2C draft and like a startup. So it's like, man, if I can get him 10 to 15, like, yeah, that actually feels pretty comfortable. If that's what I got to get him at. So where I think he's probably projecting at, like, I'm going to buy him at where he's currently at.
I would like to buy him as well, though I don't know if I'm going to be able to buy him after you guys talking about him here. So we'll see. But Brandon Inniss, Ohio State wide receiver, a lot of hype for him this last season, right? Coming in, and honestly, this is the part that I find so funny about recruits and how some services or how some people talk about recruits. They're so sure of themselves as far as Brandon Inniss. Oh, clearly the best Ohio State guy last year. Right. And then we started to see people backing off that. And who was the first one who said, I don't know if he's actually number 1 in there. I kind of like some of these other guys. And I have to give myself a little pat on the back there, because and I'm not even saying that he's bad. Like, I always still liked him. It's just that we sometimes just don't know how these guys are going to translate. And at the end of the day, now Brandon Inniss is getting all this competition. He's getting these studs recruits coming in, and Emeka Egbuka is coming back. And it's like, where's Inniss going to stick out or break out? And I just think that Jeremiah Smith coming in is better. Mylan Graham, at this point, I think is somewhat comparable, but we'll see how things play out. I consider him still kind of a sell, because I think there's people who are hanging on to, some of the things as a recruit and the fact that there's some opportunity there. But do you guys have strong opinions on Brandon Inniss?
For me, if he's a slot receiver, and he's a guy that as a junior in high school played quarterback and then, moved over to wide receiver. He's not a great route runner. I mean, at this point, what he is to me is a little bit of like, I guess I can compare his game to like what I would think what Khalil Shakur, as far as he's a physical, it's almost like a running back playing wide receiver in some ways. So after the catch, he's probably going to be pretty good, but like, is he going to be able to like win in route running, at the college level? I mean, we haven't even seen that yet, but I think those would be my questions. I would sell him at this point. I want to see him run some routes and see what he can do. Because the things that I've heard about him, as far as like, even from, some other stuff, it's like, he's super competitive and he's a dog, but like that doesn't translate to production on the field necessarily. That just means that you're going to be a good locker room guy. And those guys, may go in the first rounds if they have a good production profile. And I'm not sure if he's going to get there. I really liked what you said, Aaron. So I'm going to sell him too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't follow the year 1-0 theory as hard as some of the Campus to Canton guys do, because like I love using context, and obviously we can use context with Ohio State and say there's amazing players that were ahead of them. It's not that big of a shock that he couldn't get on the field. That being said, unfortunately for him, Meka Egbuka went back to school, and I believe that is true competition for him. And so like, is it going to be that different this year unless Egbuka's hurt and like that kind of thing? I don't know. If we're expecting Carnell Tate to really kind of take more of, or Jeremiah Smith or whoever to take more of that, MHJ kind of role, and then Egbuka's, there. And, even though they're taking the MHJ role, I still think that Egbuka will technically be the one for the team. Like he's the most productive, he's the oldest, he's the most experienced wide receiver, and I honestly love Egbuka. Like we always have, Aaron always has as well. I believe that he is a highly talented receiver, so I don't know that we can really say that like Ennis is going to get on there and be more than like a Julian Fleming or somebody like that can get you like 400 yards or something. And I'm not truly comparing the players. I never even really looked into Ennis all that much. The only feather in my cap was that I fell in love with Carnell Tate because he's an IMG Academy from Bradenton guy, right down the road. And so, like that, I'm always going to go after that guy. And, because he's a hometown kind of guy. So I'm 1-for-1 with those now, and I'm just going to keep banking on anyone coming from IMG.
I like it. You guys make some good points with Brandon Innes. 3 freshman wide receivers here. And so our esteemed guest here provided some names, and let's go over those guys. So TJ Moore going to Clemson, Jeremiah Smith going to Ohio State, and JoJo Trader going to Miami. So any thoughts initially on these guys, Josh?
But before Josh starts, and I'm sorry for interrupting, but I got really excited because I have not dove into any of these players yet. But I can easily give my piece on TJ Moore because he's a Clemson wide receiver with Cade Klubnik throwing it to him. That's all you need to know. I'm out. I want nothing to do with them. Okay, I said my piece.
But what if I told you his comp is Mike Evans?
Does he have Baker Mayfield throwing it to him? Does he have Johnny Manziel throwing it to him? He has Cade Klubnik throwing it to him. I'm out.
All right.
Well, you would be happy to know though that TJ Moore is from Tampa. So maybe he's back in for you. I don't know. Like
I'm back in.
I will say though, like this, like look, if Clemson's not the place for him, if Cade isn't good enough to get him the ball as outside wide receiver, then he'll transfer out and go somewhere else. But this kid, man, like his route running is like crazy at like 6'3", 195. I mean, he's a guy that caught touchdown after touchdown on his highlights, but even better than that, in the All-American game, like he outshined Jeremiah Smith. And I'm not saying he's going to be better than Jeremiah, but holy cow, like he was nuanced in his route running. He ran over the middle. He went over the top. I mean, he had like 12 catches, like 134 yards, a couple touchdowns. So anyways, like TJ Moore for me is like a guy that he also like jumped a ton of spots up into a 5-star in the 247 rankings. So I'm sure a lot of people are gonna be hyped on him now, but before the Army All-American week, like he wasn't that high. And so he's just a guy I really like. So, Aaron, I don't know if you want to speak on this at all, but yeah, I like TJ Moore. I do think Cade Klubnik will look better with some outside wide receivers because his outside wide receivers at Clemson have been cheeks for the last couple of years. So, it's not like he's throwing to T. Higgins.
Yeah, I think it's going to make a big difference, and Klubnik can continue to be a subpar like NFL prospect and still put up some better numbers. And just the guys that they're bringing in at Clemson to pair with what they already have there in Tyler Brown and Antonio Williams, T.J. Moore, and then Bryant Wesco. I mean, man, that wide receiver room is changing quick. Just when we thought that Clemson was dead, when we thought that they were not going to be resurgent into that wide receiver U that they were there for a while. Now they're really pulling out some big guns here. So TJ Moore, I am a fan of, and TJ Moore is way too close to DJ Moore for John to be out on him. This is unacceptable.
Well, first of all, that I didn't even think about that, which is ridiculous. But it was because I was looking at a picture of TJ Moore for the first time ever, and it's kind of bringing me flashbacks of when I first looked at Audric Estime and how I felt about him. And I'm like, you know what? I'm all in. I'm back in. I don't care about Klubnik. It doesn't matter. He's going to be better. We like player talent, not situations here. I'm all in, baby. TJ Moore, wide receiver 1 in the class.
Just pull the Godfather deal. Just when you thought you were out, pull me back in, and that's great to see there, John. So how about Jeremiah Smith? And we already touched on him a little bit here with the Brandon Inniss take, but do you have a strong buy or sell recommendation for the listeners here on Jeremiah Smith, the 5-star wide receiver for Ohio State?
I mean, look, he's being called the best prospect of the last 10 years, comp to Julio Jones. I mean, I think a guy that's like that, he may never live up to that hype because that's crazy. But, he's going to Ohio State, who's produced, first-round draft picks. And, he's going to be in a system that's going to be good for him. And I just think it's hard. He's going to be hard to miss on. Now, granted, he'll probably go really high. But I'm okay with taking a guy, a freshman. A lot of freshmen I'll be out on in the first round, but he's the type that as long as the back end of the first round, I'll take a flyer on that for sure, especially in this landscape where we're talking about a transition year for Devy, in my opinion. He's a guy that I would buy.
Yeah, when we did that Devy mock, on the Full Tilt Devy pod, we weren't quite prepared. I obviously was not prepared with the freshmen at all, and so we had talked beforehand about not having freshmen. But then Andy tried to sneak one in real quick, and we were like, "Nah, get the hell out of here! Like, you're not doing that in the third round because." And Josh had said like, "Oh, he'd probably go in the first round." I think the late first is a little crazy, but like even since then, I've seen like early to mid second in a couple like Devy mocks and stuff, and I don't think that's crazy at all. And I'm not even saying that late first is like truly crazy because there's no one else that's proven. So why not take the 5-star prospect at wide receiver U and all that? So it's not that wild, but I also don't love falling in love with the prospects that haven't ever touched the field and all that kind of stuff. So I feel pretty confident with him in like the early to mid second, but or somewhere around that price. But like Josh was saying, he's probably going to go before that. And, but at the same time, he's probably never going to live up to that. So it's one of those things where if you get a chance to get him, great. But, it might be one of those things where, well, I mean, what if he becomes, I don't want him to be a year 1-0 or anything like that. Like, I would like for him to thrive. But what if he ends up being like a 400-yard guy? I mean, it's not like Ohio State is this amazing system right now or this amazing team right now. You can get the hell out of here with anyone that thinks that Will Howard's a good quarterback because that is not true at all. If anything, I would say that it's one of the first times that I've ever actually said that Kyle McCord is a better quarterback than someone else, and it's Kyle McCord's a better quarterback than Will Howard. So I don't think that it's going to be like this amazing prolific season for anyone at Ohio State, much less for Jeremiah Smith. So it might be one of those things where technically he's a sell right now, but then you buy back in year 2.
Hey man, Julian saying waiting there in the wings now. Just flipped over to Ohio State.
That's true. They do have
good
some
call.
good prospects.
That's pretty exciting. And we know that Jeremiah Smith, I mean, patience runs in the family. I mean, he's Geno Smith's cousin, and Geno waited, what, 7, 8 years to be a starter again in the league. So we know that Jeremiah, he's not going to panic there. But let's finish up with
That's
one more.
amazing.
Let's finish up with one last guy that was listed here. That's JoJo Trader, Miami. That's a little bit lower down in the recruit ranks. He's not a bad recruit by any means, but interesting that he was listed here. Josh, do you have any thoughts with him?
Yeah, this is a absolute homer pick for me. I'm a Miami fan. I did grow up in Florida, and so, but I will say this: JoJo Trader, he was high school teammates with Jeremiah Smith, and like just watching him again in the Adidas All-American game in Orlando, like his feet and his route running are pretty elite, and I think those are two things that I look for in a wide receiver. And I think he's going to be able to pull off. I've seen some comps to Antonio Brown. Now that's pretty high comps. But like I do think he's a really good route runner, and that's really the number one thing I look for, honestly, in my wide receiver prospects is can they run routes, and he's got some other traits that are, I mean, he's fast and explosive and all those things too. So JoJo's one for me that I think could be really interesting. And he could get in there early at Miami. And I don't think there's a ton of competition for him, particularly the outside wide receiver spot. And so it'll be interesting, but we'll see. But JoJo Trader is just a guy I just want to talk about on the side. And I don't think he's going to go very high in any, I mean, I think he's definitely a 15, 20 round C2C startup type deal. So.
Yeah, he's a little bit deeper there. And just before John also adds to this, I mean, I comped him to Dorian Singer. So, I mean, John is really interested now, right?
Damn it. Now I can't say what I was going to say. No.
Oh, no.
I love it.
Once again, I know nothing about this player. The only thing I know is that he's going to Miami. And in the research that I've done in the last 7 years, of top end prospects going to Miami, they are 0-6. I believe it was either 0-6 or 0-7. Not one of those players has ended up hitting in the NFL that was a top 50 prospect going into as a recruit. And the closest thing that they have right now is Mark Fletcher, because he was last year. And I don't hate Mark Fletcher, but I don't think you can say he's proven that he's going to be an NFL stud or anything like that either right now. So that's the only like feather in their cap that they have right now, is it could be Mark Fletcher could be the first one to turn that around. But they were 0-6 of their hits in that 7-year span. So I don't know. I don't love it.
Yeah, Francis Manoa he'll be the first one to overtake that. He'll be a second round pick at least in the NFL draft. So started as a right tackle this year. But yeah, I mean, Cristobal is definitely a better evaluator than Manny Diaz and the guys that had before him. So I do think that, there's a little bit of change of guard there. But, I think ultimately, yeah, there's lots of concerns that could poke holes in the system and stuff like that they're going to run. But I do think, again, like I think his talent's going to be really good. And we'll see. Ultimately, in the transfer portal era, I just don't know if like landing spot really matters all that much, because either they're going to hit or they're going to transfer to somewhere else and then maybe get put in a better spot. So it's like it's tough to evaluate based on landing spot unless you're landing at Alabama or Ohio State or Georgia or some place that's got some real gravitas, because these guys are all just playing musical chairs at this point.
Yeah, that's good points there. And JoJo Trader, I mean, I can't say that I'm especially high on him, because I actually really like the other incoming guy, Nye Carr, in fact, who's another freshman, incoming freshman wide receiver there, he was pretty impressive in high school too. But at the end of the day, good guys. I have those guys actually ahead of 5-star wide receiver Ryan Wingo going to Texas. So, I mean, I can't say I'm too low on him. So I like it. But that's probably more. Yeah, that's probably more so that I'm a little bit lower on Wingo than consensus. But all right.
Sounds way too much like Mingo. I want nothing to do with them. I'm out.
That's the analysis you come here for at the Devy Devotional here.
That's amazing.
That's right. I mean, honestly, that's some of the deepest thought that I've ever given recruits before. So I mean, I can't even say like that I'm not trying. Like you have to be able to admit that I'm trying at this point. Recruits are not my jam. I'm trying to be better about it, but hopefully you guys enjoyed listening to this. Aaron kind of took over there as the host for the night. I kind of enjoyed it. I just got to sit back and just say stupid things over and over again, and it was really good. But it was a lot of fun. I'll take back over here for a little bit, and we'll get everyone out of here. I think I promised. Oh, we got a pup. We got a pup. A fluffy pup here. So yes, we're very excited about that. I can never remember his damn name, and I should know it. But
It's Wilbur.
Wilbur, that's what it was. I knew it was something like that. But
John,
yeah, so
John, Aaron knew that if he let you and I just talk, we'd be here all night. So he was like, I gotta take over, I gotta drive this thing, get these guys to land the plane before
you know what?
sub 2 hours.
The sad part is it's 100% true because he took over. He knew, he was like, yeah, I'm not doing this. So it's very true. We'd still be sitting on the running backs at this point. We'd still be talking about Ashton Genty if it was up to me.
Exactly.
Me and Josh just take over. But yeah, this was great. It was a lot of fun. I knew we had to get Josh on once I met him, saw who he was and obviously like heard his knowledge, his vast knowledge. And I mean, the thing is, we didn't even have a show sheet on that pod or anything. You could just tell he's just coming off the top of the noggin with it all. I love anyone that has that kind of knowledge. Then we can just sit there and ask him question after question. It doesn't have to be on a show sheet. It can be out of left field and it doesn't matter. They have an answer for it. So I appreciate you jumping on, Josh. But why don't you tell everyone where they can find you, what you're up to, anything you got going on here? Obviously, you are a little further along with the recruits than I am.
Yeah, I mean, you can find my work over at fantasypoints.com. I run the college football side of things there. And so, and then at CFF Guys on Twitter. And I dabble in a little bit of everything. I do some Devy rankings. I'm definitely not an expert by any stretch, but did have T Mac as wide receiver 3. We'll give that shout out. But I do everything, man. I do CFF, DFS stuff is really kind of where my bread and butter is at this point. And then do some like betting props type stuff. So do a little bit of everything. So yeah, follow me on Twitter and I'll always have an opinion on something. Can't always say it'd be a good opinion, but at least I get reactions.
I don't think we've ever made that promise on this pod. So, I mean, we're not breaking any laws here or anything like that. But Aaron generally does give pretty good opinions. Why don't you give us some words of wisdom before we get out of here, buddy?
Wow. Well, words of wisdom. I think there were a lot of words of wisdom on this podcast this evening. So go back and listen if you want any tips. I think that the transfer portal conversations were very beneficial, though. Just understanding that it's a different game these days and we got to apply that to some of the recruits. So, we talked about some of the running backs. If you don't really believe in them, maybe you just don't end up committing to some of those lower end guys just because of the Alabama, the Georgia landing spots, things like that, that we used to value so much in past years.
Yeah, it's a different world. I think Nick Saban leaving is kind of like the end of an era for everyone, not just Alabama, but it's kind of an end of an era, and we're seeing that things are just very different now. So I think that's a great point. It's more difficult for us. It's more difficult for me because I got to keep up with all that crap in Beth and everything. It's not great. So it's a lot of fun though, and I don't really have too much more to say except for Arch Manning starting QB week 3, baby. Week 3 this season. You heard it here first. But for now, we're going to go ahead and get out of here.